My name is Rafaela, and I need to tell you something that still aches in my chest every time I close my eyes. You see, there are wounds that bleed without ever being visible, wounds that no bandage can cover, no medicine can heal, and I carry both kinds. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I could look in the mirror without flinching, when I could walk into a room without feeling every pair of eyes dissecting my appearance, measuring my worth by the smoothness of my skin. That was before the fire, before the night that changed everything about how the world saw me, and eventually how my own son would see me too. It happened 7 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday evening that turned into a nightmare I still relive in my dreams. I was cooking dinner, Tomas's favorite actually, arroz con pollo with extra garlic, the way he'd loved it since he was a little boy. The oil in the pan caught flame faster than I could react. One moment I was stirring, humming along to an old song on the radio, and the next, fire was crawling up my arm like a living thing, hungry and merciless. The burns covered my right arm, my shoulder, and part of my neck and face. 3rd degree, the doctors said with that clinical detachment that medical professionals use to protect themselves from feeling too much of other people's pain. I spent 2 months in the hospital, enduring skin grafts and debridement procedures that hurt worse than the original burn, but I survived. I told myself that was what mattered. I survived. Tomas visited me every day during those first weeks. He held my hand, the one that wasn't wrapped in gauze, and promised me that nothing would change between us. "You're still my mom," he said, tears streaming down his face as he looked at my bandaged body. "You're still the strongest person I know." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The scars healed into thick, raised tissue that twisted across my skin like a topographical map of suffering. The pigmentation never came back properly, patches of pink and white and angry red that doctors said might fade with time but would never disappear. My right ear was partially melted, giving my face an asymmetrical quality that made strangers stare, and children point before their mothers shushed them and pulled them away. I learned to live with it. What choice did I have? I wore long sleeves even in summer. I let my hair grow longer on one side to cover what I could. I avoided mirrors except when absolutely necessary, and even then I'd look quickly, focusing only on what I needed to see, making sure my hair was brushed, my clothes were clean, never letting my gaze linger on the damage. But inside, I was still me, still Rafaela, who had raised her son alone after his father walked out when Tomas was 3. Still the woman who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and save for his college education. Still the mother who sat up through countless nights when he was sick, who cheered at every soccer game, who helped him practice for spelling bees and science fairs, who believed in him even when he stopped believing in himself. The fire had changed my outside, but my love for my son? That remained untouched, pure, absolute. Tomas graduated from university with honors, business administration, a degree that made me burst with pride even though I could barely understand half of what he talked about when he explained his coursework. He got a good job at a consulting firm, moved into a nice apartment in the city, started wearing expensive suits that I could never afford, but loved seeing him in because they represented the success we'd worked so hard for together. Then he met Elena. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are. Tall and slender, with glossy dark hair that fell in perfect waves, skin like porcelain, and a smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. She came from money, old money, the kind of family that had country club memberships and vacation homes and last names that opened doors before you even spoke. I met her for the first time at a restaurant Tomas chose, somewhere expensive where I felt immediately out of place among the cloth napkins and multiple forks and hushed conversations about stock portfolios and European travel. I'd worn my nicest dress, the navy blue one I saved for special occasions, and I'd been so nervous that my hands trembled as I walked through the door. Elena's eyes had flickered over me with an expression I'd learned to recognize. That momentary shock, followed by the rapid recalibration as she tried to maintain her polite smile while processing my appearance. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that, extended her hand, said all the right things about how wonderful it was to finally meet me, how much Tomas talked about his mother, but I saw it. That split second when her gaze caught on my scars and something in her face closed, like a door being quietly but firmly shut. Tomas seemed not to notice, or maybe he chose not to. He was so happy, introducing us, ordering wine I couldn't pronounce, talking about their plans with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found exactly what he'd been searching for. I smiled and nodded and asked questions and tried to be the mother he wanted me to be. Supportive, interested, undemanding. The engagement happened 6 months later. Tomas called me with the news, his voice bright with excitement. They'd gone to that same expensive restaurant, and he'd proposed with his grandmother's ring. My mother's ring, actually, the one piece of jewelry I'd inherited and given to him when he turned 21, telling him to save it for someone special. She said yes, Mom. Can you believe it? She said yes. I could believe it. Elena was smart enough to recognize a good thing when she saw it. My son, with his promising career, his kind heart, his determination to build something meaningful. What I couldn't believe was how quickly the wedding planning began to exclude me. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one means so much to us. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. It helps us keep bringing you these true stories that matter. At first, it was subtle. Elena and her mother would make decisions and inform Tomas, who would then inform me as an afterthought. The venue was selected. A historic estate with gardens and fountains that probably cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. The flowers were chosen, the menu tasted and approved, the photographer booked. I heard about these things third hand, through my son's casual mentions during our increasingly infrequent phone calls. "When can I help?" I asked once, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I'd love to be involved in planning. It's my only child getting married. Elena's mom is really into this stuff, Tomas said, and I could hear the distraction in his voice, like he was looking at his phone while talking to me. She's got it all under control. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. As if being excluded from my own son's wedding preparations was something I could simply choose not to feel. The dress shopping happened without me. I found out about it on social media, of all places, when one of Elena's friends posted pictures. Elena in a stunning white gown, surrounded by her mother, her sisters, her bridesmaids, all of them smiling and toasting with champagne in some upscale bridal boutique. The caption read, "Found the dress with all my favorite ladies." I stared at that photo for a long time, zooming in on the faces of all those women who apparently qualified as favorite ladies, while I, the groom's mother, hadn't even been told they were going shopping. I called Tomas that night. I saw Elena found her dress. "Oh, yeah," he sounded genuinely happy. "It's amazing. You'll love it." "I wish I could have been there," I said quietly. A pause. Then, "Mom, you know how these things are. It was kind of a girls' day thing. Elena's sisters and friends." "I'm a girl," I said, trying to make it sound like a joke even though my throat was tight. "I'm your mother." "I know, Mom. It's just different with bridal stuff. You understand." But I didn't understand. What I understood was that I was being carefully, systematically edged out of the most important day of my son's life, and he either didn't notice or didn't care enough to do anything about it. The invitations arrived at my mailbox 3 weeks before I received the phone call about them. I stood there on my front porch, holding the heavy cardstock envelope with its elegant calligraphy, and realized that I'd been sent mine the same way as every other guest, through the postal service, like a distant acquaintance rather than the mother of the groom. Inside, the invitation was beautiful. Cream-colored paper with gold embossing, traditional wording that spoke of honor and pleasure and the joining of 2 families. "Mr. and Mrs. Castellano request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Elena Maria to Tomas Raphael Morrison." I read it 3 times, looking for my name somewhere. Looking for any acknowledgement that this wasn't just Elena's day, but my son's too. That I wasn't just a guest, but family. But there was nothing. The invitation treated me exactly like it would treat Tomas's college roommate or Elena's second cousin twice removed. When I called to confirm I'd received it, Tomas sounded distracted. "Great, Mom. Make sure you RSVP soon. They need a final count for catering." "Tomas, I'm your mother. Of course I'll be there. Did you think I needed a formal invitation?" "Elena's mom is very organized about these things," he said, And I heard that tone in his voice, the one that had started appearing more often lately, the one that suggested I was being difficult by having feelings about things. She wants everything proper and by the book. Proper. By the book. As if our relationship could be reduced to etiquette rules from a wedding planning magazine. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the night before the wedding, and I wasn't invited to that either. I found out about it accidentally when Tomas mentioned something about the restaurant where we're all having dinner Friday night. What dinner? I asked. Another pause. These pauses were becoming the punctuation marks of our conversations. These moments of silence where my son had to figure out how to tell me about another event I'd been excluded from without making it sound as bad as it felt. The rehearsal dinner. It's just the wedding party and immediate family. Really small. I'm immediate family, Tomas. I'm your mother. I know, Mom, but Elena's parents are hosting, and they have this whole traditional thing about who's included. It's their culture, you know? I can't really change it. Their culture. His fiancé's family traditions mattered more than his own mother's presence. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him when exactly I'd become so disposable that I could be left out of my own son's pre-wedding celebrations without him even fighting for me. But instead, I swallowed all of that down into the place where I'd been storing so much hurt lately. I understand, I said, even though I didn't. Even though understanding was becoming the thing I did to make things easier for everyone except myself. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m., too anxious to sleep. I'd spent the previous week preparing, getting my hair done at a salon I could barely afford, buying a new dress in a dusty rose color that the saleswoman said was perfect for mothers of the groom, practicing with makeup that might help minimize the scarring on my face without making me look like I was trying too hard to hide who I was. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and looked at myself with brutal honesty. The dress was lovely, modest, and elegant, with three-quarter sleeves that covered most of my arm scars. My hair had been styled in soft waves that partially concealed the right side of my face. I'd applied foundation carefully, blending it as well as I could over the uneven texture of my skin, but I still looked like someone who'd been burned. No amount of makeup or strategic styling could completely hide that truth. The scarring on my neck rose above the neckline of the dress. My right ear's distorted shape was visible despite my hair. When I turned my head certain ways, the full extent of the damage was impossible to miss. For a moment, just a brief, painful moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to attend my son's wedding in the body I'd had before the fire. To wear a sleeveless dress without thinking twice. To know that when people looked at me in photographs, they'd see a normal mother at her son's wedding, rather than someone whose appearance became the focal point of every image she appeared in. But that version of me was gone, and no amount of wishing would bring her back. This was who I was now. Scarred, yes, but still here, still his mother, still worthy of being there on the most important day of his life. I arrived at the venue early, hoping to see Tomas before the ceremony, to give him the gift I'd brought. A watch that had belonged to his grandfather, my father, who'd died before Tomas was born. It was engraved on the back with a simple message: "Time spent with those we love is never wasted." I'd been saving it for this moment, this passage into his new life. The estate was stunning, exactly the kind of place you'd see in wedding magazines. Manicured gardens stretched in every direction, filled with late spring flowers that perfumed the air with sweetness. A white tent had been erected for the reception, its interior visible through open flaps, crystal chandeliers, round tables dressed in cream linens, centerpieces of roses and peonies that probably cost more per arrangement than I spent on groceries in a month. I found my way to the area where the wedding party was gathering, clutching my gift bag and feeling increasingly out of place among all these beautiful, polished people in their expensive clothes and confident postures. Elena's bridesmaids clustered together, perfect in their matching lavender dresses, laughing at something on someone's phone. Tomas's groomsmen stood nearby in their tuxedos, looking like they'd stepped out of a fashion advertisement. And then I saw him, my son, my Tomas, in his wedding suit, looking more handsome and grown up than I'd ever seen him. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat with pure maternal pride. This was my baby. The child I'd raised alone, the boy who'd become this remarkable man despite all the obstacles we'd faced together. I started toward him, smiling, ready to embrace him and tell him how proud I was, how much I loved him, how beautiful this day was going to be. But before I could reach him, Elena appeared at his side. She looked like something from a fairy tale in her wedding gown, all white silk and delicate lace, her hair crowned with fresh flowers. She was breathtaking, and I understood in that moment why my son had fallen so completely in love with her. She saw me approaching. Her eyes widened slightly, and she leaned close to Tomas, whispering something in his ear. I saw his expression change, saw something close off in his face as he turned to look at me. He walked toward me quickly, and for a second I thought he was coming to greet me, but his face held no warmth, no welcome. Instead, there was something else there, something that made my stomach drop even before he opened his mouth to speak. "Mom," he said, his voice low and urgent. He took my arm, not gently, and began steering me away from the wedding party, away from where guests were beginning to arrive and take their seats. "Tomas, what's wrong? I brought you something. Your grandfather's watch. Mom, I need you to do something for me." He wasn't looking at me, was instead scanning the area like he was checking to see who might be watching us. "I need you to sit in the back during the ceremony. And during photos, maybe you could just stand to the side. Or not be in them at all." The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but my brain couldn't process what he was actually saying. "What do you mean? I'm your mother. Don't I stand with the family for photos?" He finally looked at me then, really looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made everything inside me go cold and still. "Mom, your scars." He glanced around again, lowering his voice even further. "Elena's parents have spent a fortune on the photographer and videographer. All these pictures are going to be displayed at the reception, and then they'll be in our album forever. Elena has been planning this day for months, and she wants everything to be perfect." "What are you saying?" I whispered, even though I knew, even though I could feel the truth of it settling over me like ice water, freezing me from the inside out. "I'm saying that maybe it's better if you're not right next to the bride in photos. You understand, right? It's not personal, it's just, you're going to draw attention. People are going to look at you instead of at Elena, and it's her day. She deserves to have her wedding day be about her." The world tilted sideways. I heard his words, but they seemed to come from very far away, filtered through layers of cotton and disbelief. My son whom I had raised, protected, sacrificed for, was asking me to hide, to make myself invisible, to pretend I didn't exist so his bride could have perfect pictures without the embarrassment of a disfigured mother-in-law ruining the aesthetic. "Tomas," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears, thin and breathless like I'd been running. "These are my scars. This is who I am. I can't just disappear. I'm not asking you to disappear." But his eyes were still darting around, checking to see if anyone was watching this conversation, if anyone could overhear what he was saying to me. "I'm just asking you to be considerate, to think about Elena's feelings. She's been dreaming about this day since she was a little girl. And what about my feelings?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "What about the fact that I'm your mother, and I should be standing beside you during the most important moment of your life?" His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm trying to keep everyone happy here. Elena's family has expectations. They've paid for all of this, and they want the photos to be a certain way." "A certain way," I repeated slowly. "You mean without anyone who looks like me in them?" "That's not what I said." But he wouldn't meet my eyes now. "You're twisting my words. I'm just trying to be realistic. You know how people are. You know they stare. Is it really fair to Elena to have her wedding photos be about anything except her and our happiness?" Something cracked open inside my chest then. Something that had been holding together through all the small exclusions, all the forgotten invitations, all the times I'd been made to feel like an afterthought in my own son's life. This was different. This was him looking at me, at the scars I'd gotten while cooking his favorite meal, while being the mother he'd promised would always be enough, and telling me I was too ugly, too damaged, too embarrassing to stand next to his beautiful bride. "I got these scars making dinner for you," I said quietly. "I was cooking arroz con pollo, your favorite. The oil caught fire, and I tried to put it out instead of running away because the pan was directly under the smoke detector and I didn't want to wake you. You had an exam the next day. You needed your sleep. Tomas flinched, but he didn't apologize. Didn't take back what he'd said. Instead, he looked at his watch, an expensive designer piece that Elena had probably bought him, and sighed with impatience. Mom, the ceremony starts in 45 minutes. I don't have time for this right now. Can you please just do what I'm asking? Sit in the back, stay to the side during photos. That's all I'm asking. That's all? I stared at my son, this man who looked like the boy I'd raised but spoke like a stranger. You're asking me to erase myself from your wedding day because you're ashamed of how I look. I'm not ashamed, he said automatically, but the words rang hollow. I just want everything to go smoothly. Elena's already stressed. Her parents are very particular about appearances and social image, and I need to respect that. This is their only daughter getting married, and you're my only son. My voice broke on the last word. My only child. And you're telling me I'm not good enough to be seen standing next to you. A bridesmaid called out to Tomas from across the lawn, something about photos they needed to take before the ceremony. He glanced over, then back at me, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, deciding which was more important, his mother's feelings or his bride's perfect photographs. I have to go, he said. Please, Mom. Just cooperate. You can still be here, just in the background. That's better than nothing, right? He walked away before I could answer. Walked away and left me standing there in my dusty rose dress with my carefully styled hair and my makeup that couldn't hide what I was, holding a gift bag containing his grandfather's watch that he hadn't even asked about. I watched him rejoin his groomsmen, watched him laugh at something one of them said, watched him transform back into the happy groom, the excited young man about to start his new life, and I understood with devastating clarity that in that new life, there was no room for a mother who looked like me. Guests were arriving now, streaming past me in their elegant attire, chatting and laughing and finding their seats under the beautiful flower-draped archway where the ceremony would take place. Some of them glanced at me curiously, their eyes catching on my scars and then quickly looking away, that familiar dance of shock and polite avoidance I'd witnessed thousands of times since the fire. I found myself drifting toward the back of the seating area, moving mechanically, like someone else was controlling my body while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. The back row. That's where he wanted me, hidden away where the photographer wouldn't accidentally capture me in shots, where I wouldn't ruin the beautiful aesthetic of his perfect wedding day. Elena's parents sat in the front row, her mother in an ice blue designer dress, and her father in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They looked exactly like what they were. Wealthy, important people attending an event they'd orchestrated and financed, surrounded by other wealthy, beautiful people who all fit together like pieces of an expensive puzzle. And then there was me, the damaged piece that didn't match, that distorted the pretty picture they were trying to create. I sat down in the last row, my hands folded in my lap, the gift bag with the watch sitting beside me like a companion in my exile. Around me, people chatted excitedly about how beautiful the venue was, how lucky the weather had turned out, how gorgeous the bride was surely going to be. No one spoke to me. No one even seemed to notice I was there, which I suppose was exactly what Tomas had wanted. The string quartet began playing, and the wedding party started their procession down the aisle. Bridesmaids in their matching lavender dresses, each one escorted by a groomsman. They looked like they'd stepped out of a wedding magazine. Young and unmarked and perfectly coordinated. The guests oohed and awed appreciatively, pulling out their phones to take pictures of this beautiful moment. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for, Elena's entrance with her father. The music swelled into something grand and romantic, and every head turned to watch her walk down the aisle in her stunning white gown. She was radiant, glowing with happiness, and I couldn't even hate her for it. This was supposed to be a joyful moment. She was just a young woman in love, wanting her wedding day to be perfect. But perfect meant erasing me. Perfect meant making sure the damaged, scarred mother-in-law stayed far enough away that she wouldn't contaminate the beauty of the photographs. I watched Tomas's face as Elena approached him, saw the love and pride there, the way his eyes filled with tears as she took his hand. I remembered holding that hand when he was small, when he'd wake from nightmares and cry for me, when he'd been scared of the dark or worried about starting a new school. I remembered that hand clutching mine in the hospital while I lay bandaged and broken, promising me that nothing would change between us. But everything had changed. Or maybe nothing had changed. Maybe I'd simply been blind to what was always there. This capacity for cruelty, this willingness to discard people who no longer served his image of the life he wanted. The ceremony was beautiful. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about choosing someone and standing by them through everything life brought, about honoring and cherishing in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. The irony of those words, spoken at a wedding where the groom had just asked his mother to hide because her scars were too unsightly for photographs, would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastatingly painful. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife and invited Tomas to kiss his bride, everyone applauded. Cameras flashed, people cheered. And I sat in the back row, clapping mechanically, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't stop and didn't bother to hide because no one was looking at me anyway. The recessional music played, and the newly married couple walked back down the aisle, beaming and waving at guests. As they passed my row, Tomas's eyes flickered toward me for just a moment. I saw him register my tears, saw something that might have been guilt flash across his face. But then Elena squeezed his hand and said something that made him laugh, and the moment passed. They continued down the aisle and disappeared toward the reception tent, surrounded by their beautiful wedding party and their perfectly curated group of guests. I stayed in my seat while everyone else migrated toward the cocktail hour, stayed there alone in the empty rows of chairs, listening to the distant sounds of celebration, of champagne glasses clinking and laughter floating on the breeze. Stayed there holding a gift for a son who had made it clear that my presence was tolerated but not desired, that my love was acceptable only as long as I kept myself hidden from view. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting for hours instead of just through one ceremony. The gift bag hung heavy in my hand, and I thought about just leaving it on the chair, walking away and never looking back. But some stubborn part of me, the part that had survived the fire, that had rebuilt my life from nothing, that had refused to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier, made me carry it toward the reception tent. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. Guests clustered in small groups, laughing and talking, everyone looking so effortlessly elegant in their designer clothes and perfect hair. I stood at the edge of it all, watching, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's celebration. I saw Elena's mother holding court with a group of women who all looked like they belonged to the same country club, the same social circle where appearances mattered more than substance, and the right last name opened every door. She was animated, gesturing with her champagne glass, and the women around her laughed at something she said with that practiced social laugh that wealthy people perfect over years of networking events and charity galas. Tomas was nearby with his groomsmen, all of them young and successful-looking, the kind of men who'd never struggled for anything, who'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. They were probably discussing investments and business opportunities and other things that men with money talked about when they gathered together. My son fit right in with them now. He'd worked hard to get there, but looking at him in that moment, I barely recognized the boy who used to help me count coins to make sure we had enough for bus fare. I saw the photographer setting up for family portraits in a garden area, where the light was apparently perfect. Elena's extended family was gathering. Parents, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. A small army of well-dressed people who all belonged to each other, who all fit seamlessly into the perfect picture of an important family at an important occasion. And then I saw the photographer gesture to Tomas, calling him over for the groom's family photos. This was it. This was my moment to be included, to stand beside my son as his mother, to be acknowledged as family even if I'd been exiled to the back row during the ceremony. I started walking toward them, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Several steps in, I saw Tomas notice me approaching. Saw his expression shift from relaxed happiness to something else. Tension, maybe, or worry. He said something quickly to the photographer, who nodded and began directing people into position. "Tomas?" I called out, loud enough that people nearby turned to look. "Should I come over for family photos?" The conversations around me stopped. People were staring now, not even pretending to look away. I was creating a scene, the one thing I'd spent 7 years trying not to do. But I didn't care anymore. I was his mother. I had earned the right to be in these photographs. Tomas walked toward me quickly, that same urgent energy he'd had before the ceremony, like I was a problem that needed to be managed before it got out of control. When he reached me, he took my elbow and guided me away from the crowd, his grip firm enough to make sure I came with him. "Mom, what are you doing?" His voice was low but sharp with irritation. "We talked about this." "You talked," I said, pulling my arm free from his grasp. "I never agreed to hide during your wedding like something shameful. I'm your mother, Tomas. I should be in family photos. You're making a scene." He glanced back at the gathered guests, many of whom were still watching us with undisguised curiosity. "Elena's relatives are all here. They're already taking pictures. Can you please just not do this right now?" "Not do what? Try to exist at my own son's wedding? Try to be acknowledged as your family?" My voice was rising despite my efforts to control it. 7 years of practicing staying calm, of not drawing attention, of making myself small and unobtrusive. All of it was crumbling away under the weight of this humiliation. Elena appeared then, still looking flawless in her wedding gown, though there was something sharp in her expression now, something that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted and didn't appreciate obstacles. "Tomas, is everything okay?" "The photographer is waiting." "Everything's fine," Tomas said automatically, but his jaw was clenched tight. "Just give me a minute." Elena's eyes moved to me, and I saw the assessment there, the quick calculation of a woman who understood social dynamics and image management, who knew instinctively that I was a problem that needed solving. "Mrs. Morrison," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "why don't you enjoy the cocktail hour? There are some wonderful appetizers. We'll do general family photos later that you can be in." It was said so smoothly, so politely, that to object would make me look unreasonable. But I understood what she was really saying. Go away. You don't belong in the important photos. We'll take some throwaway shots with you later to make you feel better. Pictures that will never make it into the wedding album, that will stay buried on a photographer's hard drive and eventually be deleted to make room for other people's better memories. "I don't want appetizers," I said, looking not at Elena, but at my son. "I want to be in photos with my son on his wedding day. I want to be treated like I matter, like I'm actually family instead of some embarrassing relative you're trying to hide." Tomas's face flushed red. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. Nobody's trying to hide you. We're just trying to be organized about photos. There's an order to these things. An order that puts me last. An order that keeps me away from you and your bride because I might ruin the perfect pictures with my damaged face." The words came out bitter and loud enough that people nearby definitely heard them. I saw heads turning, conversations stopping, that particular quality of attention that comes when drama unfolds at a social event. "Don't say it like that," Tomas hissed. "You're making it sound worse than it is." "Then how should I say it?" I demanded. "How should I describe my own son asking me to hide during his wedding because he's ashamed of me?" "I'm not ashamed," he said, but he couldn't even look at me when he said it. His eyes kept darting to Elena, to the gathered guests, to anywhere except my face. "I'm trying to respect Elena's wishes. She's my wife now. Her happiness matters to me. And mine doesn't?" The question hung between us, sharp and painful and impossible to take back. Elena put her hand on Tomas's arm, a gesture that was clearly meant to show solidarity, but felt more like ownership, like she was marking her territory. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you're emotional. Weddings are emotional for everyone. But Tomas and I have made decisions together about how we want our wedding day to go, and we need you to respect that. Decisions that don't include me," I said flatly. "Decisions that treat me like an embarrassment to be managed instead of a mother to be honored." "That's not fair," Tomas said, and now there was anger in his voice, clear and undisguised. "You're the one being unfair right now. You're the one trying to make our wedding day about you and your feelings instead of letting us just be happy." The accusation felt like a physical blow. I was trying to make their wedding about me? I, who had been excluded from dress shopping and rehearsal dinners and family photos? I, who had been banished to the back row and told to stay out of sight? I was the one being selfish? "I wore this dress for you," I said, and my voice was shaking now, all the control I'd been trying to maintain finally slipping away. I spent money I don't have to get my hair done, to buy new makeup, to try to look presentable for your wedding day. I brought you your grandfather's watch, the one I've been saving for years to give you at this moment, and you won't even stand next to me for a photograph. Tomas looked at the gift bag I was still holding like he'd forgotten about it entirely. For a second, just one brief, flickering second, I saw something like regret cross his face. But then Elena squeezed his arm, and he straightened his shoulders, and whatever softness had appeared was gone. "Mom, I think maybe you should go home." The words were quiet but final, delivered with the tone of someone who had made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. "You're upset, and you're making everyone else uncomfortable. This is supposed to be a happy day, and you're turning it into something else." I stared at my son, at this man I had raised alone, sacrificing everything so he could have opportunities I never had. At this person I had loved more than my own life, who was now asking me to leave his wedding because my presence, my very existence, was inconvenient. "You want me to leave?" I repeated slowly, making sure I understood. "You're asking me to leave your wedding." He didn't answer right away, just stood there with Elena's hand still on his arm, looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the problem that had ruined what should have been his perfect day. "I think it would be better for everyone," Elena said when Tomas remained silent. Her voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to getting her way through practiced politeness. "You're clearly very emotional right now, and perhaps some time to calm down would help. We can talk about this later, when everyone's had a chance to reflect." Reflect. As if this were some minor disagreement that could be resolved with a calm conversation over coffee. As if my son hadn't just told me I was too ugly to stand beside him on the most important day of his life. I looked around at the guests who were no longer even pretending not to watch, saw the pity in some faces, the discomfort in others, the barely concealed judgment in still others. These people, strangers mostly, were witnessing my humiliation, watching me be cast out by my own child, and not one of them said anything. Not one person stepped forward to say that what was happening was wrong, that a mother deserved better than this. But why would they? They didn't know me. They didn't know what I'd sacrificed, what I'd endured, what I'd given up, so that Tomas could become the man standing before me now in his expensive suit, surrounded by all this wealth and elegance. To them, I was just a scarred woman causing a scene at a beautiful wedding, disrupting the celebration with my inconvenient emotions. "Okay," I said quietly. The fight drained out of me all at once, leaving behind only a hollow exhaustion. "Okay, I'll go." I saw relief flash across Tomas's face, and that hurt worse than anything else. He was relieved. Relieved to be rid of me. Relieved that the problem was solving itself. Relieved that he could return to his perfect wedding without the embarrassment of his damaged mother ruining the aesthetic. I held out the gift bag to him. "This was your grandfather's. He wanted you to have it someday. The engraving says, 'Time spent with those we love is never wasted.'" I guess he was wrong about that. Tomas took the bag automatically, his expression unreadable. "Mom, don't what? Don't tell the truth? Don't acknowledge that you just chose your pride over your mother?" I shook my head slowly. "I survived a fire for you, Tomas. I lived through skin grafts and surgeries and years of pain because I wanted to be here for you, to see you grow up, to be part of your life, and you can't even stand next to me for a photograph. It's not about the scars," he said, but it was such an obvious lie that even Elena looked uncomfortable. "It's about you making everything difficult. You've been difficult about this whole wedding from the beginning." "I've been difficult?" I almost laughed, but the sound that came out was broken and bitter. I wasn't invited to dress shopping. I wasn't included in the rehearsal dinner. I received my invitation in the mail like a distant acquaintance. I sat in the back row during your ceremony. And I'm the one who's difficult? Mom, please. There was exhaustion in his voice now, like I was a tiresome child throwing a tantrum. Can we not do this here? Can we just talk about it later, when you've calmed down? But there was no later. I understood that now with perfect clarity. There would never be a moment when my son would suddenly realize what he'd done, would apologize for how he'd treated me, would acknowledge that I deserved better. This was who he was now, a man who valued appearances over love, who cared more about what other people thought than about the feelings of the woman who'd raised him. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You've made yourself very clear. I'm an embarrassment. My scars make me unfit to stand beside you. I don't belong in your new life with your beautiful wife and her wealthy family." "That's not what I said," Tomasz protested weakly, but he didn't move toward me, didn't reach out to stop me from leaving, just stood there next to Elena, looking uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change anything. I turned to Elena then, this young woman who had barely entered my son's life, but had somehow managed to erase me from it. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said, and I meant it to sound sincere, but it came out flat and empty. "I hope your photographs turn out exactly how you want them, perfect and unblemished, with no damaged people to ruin the pretty pictures." Elena's face flushed, but she lifted her chin with defiance. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry you feel that way. That was never our intention. Your intentions don't matter much compared to your actions," I replied. "And your actions have made it very clear that I'm not welcome in this family." I walked away before either of them could respond. Walked through the crowd of staring guests with my head up, refusing to let them see how completely shattered I was inside. Walked past the flower arrangements and the champagne fountains and the string quartet playing beautiful music for beautiful people at a beautiful wedding that I was no longer part of. My car was parked in a lot behind the main house, and the walk felt endless. Each step took me further from the celebration, from the sounds of laughter and music, from my son and his new life that apparently had no room for a mother with visible damage. My feet hurt in the new shoes I'd bought especially for today. The straps were digging into my heels, probably leaving blisters, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I got into my car and sat behind the wheel for a long time, not starting the engine, just sitting in the silence and letting the reality of what had happened wash over me. My son had chosen his image over his mother, had valued a perfect photograph more than my presence, had been willing to humiliate me publicly rather than risk his bride's displeasure. And the worst part, the part that made everything else unbearable, was that I wasn't even surprised. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. The growing distance, the casual exclusions, the way he'd started measuring my worth by the same shallow standards his new social circle used. I'd ignored them all, told myself it was just the natural process of a child growing up and starting his own life. But it wasn't that. It was him learning to be ashamed of where he came from, of the mother who'd raised him, of anything that didn't fit the polished image he was trying to project. I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the road. The house was dark and empty when I arrived, exactly as I'd left it hours ago when I'd set out for my son's wedding full of hope and maternal pride. Now I returned to it diminished, rejected, cast out from the most important event in my child's life. I sat on my couch still wearing my dusty rose dress, my carefully styled hair already coming undone, my makeup probably streaked from the tears I'd cried in the car. Around me, the house felt suffocatingly silent. No dog to greet me, no husband to ask how it went, no family to share this pain with, just me and the echoing emptiness of a life that had somehow become smaller and lonelier than I'd ever imagined possible. The scars on my arm throbbed the way they sometimes did when I was stressed, phantom pains that the doctor said were my nerves misfiring, my body remembering trauma that had happened years ago. I traced the raised tissue with my fingers, following the familiar patterns of damage that had defined so much of my life since the fire. I had survived the flames. I had survived the hospitalizations and the surgeries, and the long, painful recovery. I had survived the stares and the whispers and the way people recoiled from my appearance. I had rebuilt my life from nothing, learned to function with a body that no longer looked like my own, found ways to exist in a world that valued beauty and perfection above everything else. But I didn't know if I could survive this, didn't know if it was possible to recover from being rejected by your own child, from having your love deemed insufficient because it came in a damaged package. The phone stayed silent all evening. No call from Tomasz to apologize, to say he'd made a mistake, to ask me to come back. No text message explaining that he'd been overwhelmed and hadn't meant what he said. Nothing. Just silence that confirmed everything I'd feared. That he'd meant every word. That he was relieved to have me gone. that his wedding was better without my presence ruining it. I went to bed that night still wearing the dress, too exhausted and heartbroken to bother changing. Lay there in the darkness thinking about all the years I'd spent loving this child, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the times I'd put his needs before my own. And for what? So he could grow up to be the kind of man who was ashamed of his mother? So he could learn to measure people's worth by their appearance rather than their character? Sleep came eventually, though it was fitful and full of dreams where I was trying to find my way through a maze of mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of my scarred face, each one more distorted than the last. The days after the wedding blurred together in a haze of pain and numbness. I called in sick to my job at the call center where I'd been working since recovering enough to return to employment. My supervisor was understanding, or maybe just indifferent, and told me to take whatever time I needed. I spent those days moving through my house like a ghost, unable to eat, unable to focus, unable to do anything except replay that terrible moment over and over in my mind. "Don't stand next to the bride. You're embarrassing." The words had burrowed into my brain, repeating on an endless loop. I'd wake up hearing them, fall asleep hearing them, find them echoing through every quiet moment when I wasn't actively distracting myself. On the fourth day, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at my reflection for the first time in years. I'd spent so long avoiding my own image, glancing only quickly when necessary, never allowing myself to truly see what others saw. But now I forced myself to look. The scars were extensive. The right side of my face bore thick, ropey tissue that pulled at my skin, distorting my features. My ear was partially melted, giving my head an asymmetrical appearance. The scarring continued down my neck and disappeared beneath my shirt, covering my shoulder and arm in a patchwork of discolored skin, some pink, some white, some still faintly red even after all these years. I understood, looking at myself objectively, why people stared. Why children pointed before their parents shushed them. Why strangers did double takes and then quickly looked away, uncomfortable with their own reactions. I was marked, damaged, different in ways that made people fundamentally uncomfortable. But I was also still here, still breathing, still alive, still the same person I'd been before the fire, just wrapped in different packaging. Something shifted in me as I stood there. Maybe it was hitting rock bottom and finding there was nowhere else to fall. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 7 years of making myself small and apologetic for simply existing in a body that bore the evidence of survival. Maybe it was just exhaustion with the whole performance of trying to hide who I was. Whatever it was, something hardened inside my chest. A resolve I hadn't felt since those early days in the hospital when I'd had to choose between giving up or fighting to live. I had survived fire. I would survive this too. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the local library and used their computers to research burn survivor communities. Within an hour, I'd discovered a whole world I'd been oblivious to. Support groups, advocacy organizations, people who not only lived with visible differences, but who spoke about them openly, proudly, refusing to hide or apologize. One organization in particular caught my attention, Phoenix Rising, a nonprofit that worked with burn survivors to help them reclaim their lives and their narratives. Their website featured photos of people with scars far more extensive than mine, people who were smiling, laughing, living full lives without shame. Their mission statement talked about redefining beauty standards and challenging societal prejudices about appearance. I sent them an email that same day, told them my story in brief, clinical terms that didn't capture even a fraction of the pain, but gave them the basic facts. Expected nothing in response, just needed to reach out to someone, anyone, who might understand. They replied within 24 hours. A woman named Catherine Rodriguez, the organization's founder, wrote that she'd love to talk with me. She was a burn survivor herself, she explained, and had started Phoenix Rising after experiencing similar rejection from people who couldn't see past her scars. She left her phone number and invited me to call anytime. I stared at that phone number for 3 days before I finally gathered the courage to dial it. My hands shook as I pressed the buttons, and I almost hung up twice before someone answered. "Phoenix Rising, this is Catherine." Her voice was warm and professional. and hearing it made something inside me crack open. Before I could stop myself, I was crying. Great, heaving sobs that I'd been holding back for days. Crying for my son's rejection, for the years I'd spent hiding, for the loneliness of carrying this burden alone. Catherine didn't rush me, didn't tell me to calm down or pull myself together. Just waited patiently until the storm passed, occasionally making small sounds of understanding that let me know she was still there, still listening. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. About Tomas, about the wedding, about being asked to leave because my appearance was embarrassing, about raising him alone and sacrificing everything and having it all mean nothing in the end. "I understand," Catherine said when I finished, and the simple certainty in her voice made it clear she truly did. I had a similar experience with my daughter. She was 12 when I was burned in a car accident, watched me go through years of surgeries and recoveries. And then when she turned 17 and started caring about her social image, she asked me not to come to her school events. Said her friends made comments about how I looked. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice raw from crying. "I made a choice," Catherine said. "I decided that if people were going to stare at me anyway, I might as well give them something worth staring at. Started speaking publicly about my experience, began working with other survivors, turned my pain into purpose. I don't know if I can do that," I admitted. "I've spent 7 years trying to be invisible." "That's exactly why you should consider it," Catherine replied gently. "Because you've already tried hiding, and it didn't protect you from being hurt. Maybe it's time to try something else. Maybe it's time to be visible on your own terms." We talked for 2 hours that first conversation. Catherine told me about the work Phoenix Rising did, about the speaking engagements at schools and hospitals, about the advocacy campaigns challenging beauty standards in media and advertising. She told me about other survivors who'd found healing not through hiding, but through radical acceptance of who they were. By the end of the call, I'd agreed to attend their next support group meeting. Just to observe, I told myself. Just to see what it was like to be around other people who understood. The meeting was held in a community center across town. I arrived early, nervous and uncertain, wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather. The room gradually filled with people, men and women of various ages, all bearing visible evidence of burns or other trauma. Some had scarring far more extensive than mine. Others had lost fingers or had contractures that limited their movement. But what struck me most wasn't their injuries. It was their faces. They were smiling, laughing, greeting each other with genuine warmth. There was no shame here. No apologies for existing in bodies that bore the marks of survival. Catherine found me standing awkwardly by the refreshments table. She was a small woman in her 50s with burn scars covering most of her face and neck. But her smile was radiant, her energy infectious. "Rafaela," she said, embracing me like an old friend. "I'm so glad you came." That meeting changed something fundamental in how I saw myself. Hearing other people's stories of rejection and rebuilding, of pain and perseverance, made me realize I wasn't alone. My experience wasn't unique. The shame I'd been carrying wasn't mine to bear. One woman talked about her husband leaving her after she was burned. Another described being fired from her job because her employer thought her appearance would upset customers. A young man shared how his parents had asked him not to attend family gatherings because his scars made relatives uncomfortable. Each story was different, but the thread running through all of them was the same. People who'd been made to feel like their suffering had somehow made them less worthy of love, less deserving of respect, less entitled to take up space in the world. Over the following weeks, I became a regular at Phoenix Rising meetings. Catherine began mentoring me, teaching me how to reframe my story, not as a tragedy that had happened to me, but as evidence of my strength and resilience. She encouraged me to stop hiding my scars, to wear short sleeves, to pull my hair back instead of using it as a curtain. "Every time you hide," she told me one afternoon over coffee, "you're agreeing with the people who think you should be ashamed. You're validating their judgment. But when you show yourself fully, unapologetically, you're making a statement that you refuse to be diminished by their limitations." It was terrifying at first. The first time I went to the grocery store in a short-sleeved shirt, I almost turned around and went home 3 times, but I forced myself to walk through those doors, to push my cart through the aisles while people stared, to stand in the checkout line with my scars fully visible. And something unexpected happened. Yes, people stared, but some people also smiled. A few even complimented my courage, told me stories about their own injuries or losses, connected with me as a human being rather than just as a scarred woman to be pitied or avoided. Catherine started inviting me to speaking engagements. Small ones at first, a high school health class, a hospital support group, a community center presentation. She'd share her story, and then I'd share mine. I talked about the fire, about the recovery, about learning to live in a body that no longer looked like the one I'd been born with. But I also talked about Tomas, about being rejected by my own son, about the wedding day that had broken my heart, about the particular cruelty of being told that your love wasn't enough because it came in a package that didn't meet someone else's standards of acceptability. Those parts of my story resonated with people in ways I hadn't expected. After one presentation at a women's shelter, 3 different women approached me in tears, sharing their own experiences of rejection by family members. One had been disowned by her parents after a car accident left her paralyzed. Another had been abandoned by her husband after a mastectomy. A third had children who refused to visit because they were ashamed of her mental illness. "Thank you for saying it out loud," one of them told me, gripping my hands tightly. "Thank you for naming the thing nobody wants to talk about. That sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us most." My story began spreading through survivor networks and advocacy circles. Catherine submitted it to a documentary filmmaker who was creating a series about people living with visible differences. The filmmaker contacted me, interested in featuring my experience as part of her project. I agreed, partly because Catherine encouraged me, but also because some defiant part of me wanted Tomas to see what he'd done. Wanted him to understand that his rejection hadn't destroyed me, that I'd found purpose and community and self-worth without his validation. The filming took place over several weeks. The documentary team followed me to Phoenix Rising meetings, recorded my presentations at schools and community centers, interviewed me about my journey from shame to acceptance. They asked about Tomas, about the wedding, about how it felt to be rejected by my own child. I answered honestly. Didn't try to protect him or soften the truth. Told the story exactly as it had happened. The voice message asking me to hide, the request to leave, the choice he'd made between his image and his mother. He taught me something important, I told the camera during one interview. He taught me that you can survive anything, even the loss of the person you love most. He taught me that my worth isn't determined by whether someone else can see it. And he taught me that sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people we'd never imagine could hurt us. The documentary premiered at a film festival 6 months after the wedding. It won awards, got picked up by a streaming service, began generating attention from media outlets interested in stories about resilience and redefining beauty standards. Suddenly, my face was everywhere, not as something to hide or be ashamed of, but as a symbol of survival and strength. Catherine called me the morning after a major newspaper ran a feature article about the documentary. "Rafaela, you need to see this. We've been flooded with messages from people who watch the film and want to share their own stories. Your honesty about your son touched something in people." I read through the messages with tears streaming down my face. Hundreds of people, mothers, fathers, siblings, friends, all sharing experiences of being rejected by family members because of their appearance, their disabilities, their circumstances. All thanking me for giving voice to a pain that society preferred to pretend didn't exist. One message in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman whose daughter had asked her not to attend her college graduation because the mother's facial disfigurement from cancer treatment might embarrass the daughter in front of her friends. "I thought I was alone in this shame," she wrote. "Thought I was the only mother who'd been deemed unworthy of her child's love because of how I look. Thank you for showing me I'm not crazy for being hurt. Thank you for validating that this pain is real." The speaking invitations increased. Schools wanted me to talk to students about bullying and acceptance. Hospitals invited me to share my story with newly burned patients. Advocacy organizations asked me to testify at hearings about discrimination based on appearance. My calendar filled with engagements, each one an opportunity to transform my pain into something meaningful. Through it all, Tomas remained silent. No phone call, no email, no message acknowledging what I was doing. or how public my story had become. I didn't know if he'd seen the documentary, read the articles, heard about my speaking tours. Part of me hoped he had, hoped he was watching his rejected mother become someone who inspired thousands of people, who'd turned her humiliation into a platform for change. But another part of me, the part that was still his mother, that still remembered holding him as a baby and loving him before anything else in the world mattered, that part just ached for him to understand what he'd lost. Not me necessarily, but the opportunity to be the kind of person who loved without conditions, who valued character over appearances, who understood that true beauty had nothing to do with unmarked skin. 9 months after the wedding, I was invited to speak at a major burn survivor conference. 300 people in attendance, medical professionals and survivors and family members all gathered to share knowledge and experiences. Catherine introduced me, and I walked onto that stage wearing a sleeveless dress, my scars fully visible, my head held high. I told my story one more time, but this version was different from the ones I'd told before. This time, I talked not just about the pain of rejection, but about the unexpected gift it had given me, the gift of finding myself, of discovering a purpose larger than my own hurt, of learning that validation had to come from within rather than from the approval of others. My son thought my scars made me less, I said to that audience of 300 people. But these scars made me more empathetic, more resilient, more determined to create a world where people aren't judged by their appearances. He tried to make me invisible, and instead I became impossible to ignore. The applause was thunderous. People stood, some crying, some cheering, all of them understanding what it meant to claim your story instead of letting it claim you. After the conference, as attendees were gathering for a reception, Catherine found me backstage. Her expression was serious, almost worried. "Rafaela, there's someone here who wants to see you. I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I think you need to know. It's your son." My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Tomas was here. After 9 months of silence, after all the speaking engagements and articles and the documentary that had laid bare his cruelty for the world to see, he'd finally shown up. "Where?" I managed to ask. "In the hallway outside. He's been waiting for over an hour. Asked if he could speak with you after your presentation." Catherine touched my arm gently. "You don't have to see him if you're not ready. I can tell him to leave." Part of me wanted exactly that. To refuse him the same way he'd refused me, to let him feel what it was like to be turned away by someone you loved. But another part, the part that had spent 9 months transforming pain into purpose, knew that avoiding him would only give him continued power over my peace. "I'll see him," I said, "but not alone. Will you stay with me?" Catherine nodded, and together we walked to the hallway where Tomas stood near a window, looking out at the city below. He'd lost weight. His suit, though expensive as always, hung a bit loose on his frame. When he turned and saw me, I watched his face transform. Shock, shame, something that might have been grief all passing across his features in quick succession. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on the word. "Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." I said nothing, just looked at him, this man who was my son but felt like a stranger, and waited for him to explain why he was here, what he wanted, what could possibly justify showing up now after everything. He seemed to struggle with where to begin. "I saw the documentary, and the articles, and He stopped, swallowed hard. "I heard your speech just now. Every word. And?" I kept my voice neutral, refusing to make this easier for him. "And I need you to know that I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I watched you up there on that stage, talking about how I rejected you, how I asked you to leave my wedding because of your scars, and I wanted to disappear. I wanted to stop existing because I couldn't believe I'd done that to you, that I'd been that person. But you were," I said quietly. "You are. Those weren't lies I told up there. That's exactly what happened." "I know." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know, and there's no excuse for it. Elena and we're separated now. Have been for 3 months. She said some things about her friend's children, about how she didn't want our future kids to be marked by association with your appearance. And hearing her say that, I suddenly saw how ugly we'd both been, how shallow and cruel. You're telling me this like it should make me feel better, I observed. Like your marriage failing somehow fixes what you did to me. No, He stopped, seemed to gather himself. I'm not trying to fix anything. I know I can't. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I understand why you've been telling the world about it. You should tell the world. People need to know that this kind of rejection happens, that families can be this cruel. Catherine spoke up then, her voice firm. Rafaela has built an entire life without you, Tomas. She's helped thousands of people find the courage to accept themselves. She's become a voice for people who society tells them they should hide. She doesn't need your apology to validate her worth. I know she doesn't, Tomas said, looking at Catherine with respect. I've been watching what she's been doing. I've seen how many people she's helped, and I'm proud of her, even though I have no right to be. You're right, I said, and my voice was stronger now, steadier. You don't have that right. You gave it up when you chose your image over your mother, when you decided that your pride was worth more than my dignity. I did, he agreed, not arguing, not making excuses, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I needed to come here and tell you face to face that you were right about everything. My scars, the ones I carry inside from making that choice, those are the ones I deserve. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't expected. He was broken, not in the obvious way my body was broken, not in a way that people could see from the outside, but broken nonetheless, damaged by his own choices, scarred by his own cruelty in ways that no surgery could fix. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked him. It wasn't being asked to hide. It wasn't even being asked to leave your wedding. The worst part was realizing that everything I'd sacrificed for you, all the years I'd spent raising you alone and working myself to exhaustion so you could have opportunities I never had. None of it mattered because you'd learned to measure people's worth by their appearance instead of their character. I know, he whispered, and I failed you, failed the woman who taught me everything important. I became exactly the kind of person you raised me not to be. Yes, you did. I felt Catherine's supportive presence beside me, felt the strength I'd built over 9 months of speaking my truth, of refusing to hide anymore. And I forgive you. The words surprised even me, but as soon as I said them, I knew they were true. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger had become exhausting. Because I'd learned that healing meant releasing the people who'd hurt you, not for their sake, but for your own. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, I continued. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, or that it didn't damage me. It means I'm choosing to move forward without letting your choices continue to define my life. Tomas nodded, accepting this with a humility I'd never seen in him before. That's more than fair. That's more than I deserve. Can I ask, is there any chance we could try again? Start over? I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I could learn to be the son you deserved all along. I considered this carefully, looked at the man before me, damaged by his own cruelty but seemingly genuine in his remorse, thought about all I'd learned in 9 months of speaking and advocacy, about second chances and redemption, and the complicated nature of family love. Maybe, I said finally, but not now, not yet. I need more time, and you need to prove through your actions, not just your words, that you've actually changed. That you understand what you did and why it was wrong. I'll wait as long as it takes, he promised. And Mom, thank you for surviving, for refusing to hide, for showing the world, showing me, what real strength looks like. I nodded, and he turned to leave, but I called out to stop him. Tomas, one more thing. My scars don't make me less of a mother, but your shame made you less of a son. Remember that. He absorbed those words like physical blows, nodded once, and walked away. I watched him go, feeling lighter than I had in months, not because he'd apologized, but because I'd finally said everything I needed to say, had stood my ground without crumbling, had shown him exactly who I'd become in his absence. Catherine hugged me tightly. You were magnificent, both up there on that stage and just now. You showed him grace without giving away your power. That takes real strength. I learned from the best, I told her, squeezing her hand. That night, lying in my hotel room, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the woman who'd hidden behind long sleeves and styled hair, who'd apologized for existing, who'd allowed her son to cast her aside like something shameful, to the woman I'd become, someone who spoke her truth boldly, who helped others find their voices, who refused to let anyone else's limitations define her worth. The scars on my skin hadn't changed. They were still there, still visible, still marking me as different. But everything else had changed. I'd changed. And in changing, I'd found something my son's love had never given me, the certainty that I was enough, exactly as I was, scars and all. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't burned into skin, they're carved into the heart by the people we love most. But even those wounds can heal, can become sources of strength rather than shame, can transform us into people who help others survive their own fires. I'd survived the flames that scarred my body, and I'd survived the rejection that scarred my heart. Both had marked me, changed me, made me into someone I never expected to become. Someone stronger, someone braver, someone who knew that true beauty had nothing to do with perfect skin and everything to do with perfect courage. The courage to be yourself, fully and unapologetically, no matter who thinks you should hide.